So, a legislative history is the information embodied in any legislative documents that provides the meaning and interpretation of the statute. It can be a listing of those documents, something that we call a bibliography, or it can be the actual documents themselves. In order to help you visualize where these documents get produced, I'm going to be referring to this poster produced by the U.S. Government Printing Office on how a bill becomes a law. I realize it's way too small for you to actually be able to read the entries, but I will attempt to show you where in the process the different types of documents can be produced. So the first document of a legislative history is the bill. Most bills go nowhere and are filed just so the congressman can say, "I introduced legislation in Washington that blah, 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 blah," in their campaign literature. But for those bills that become enacted, the bill contains the language that will be the law, and it can change as it goes through the legislative process. Bills can be introduced in one chamber at a time, or both at the same time, and one bill passed in lieu of the other. Bills with different numbers on the same subject are related bills, and when one related bill is passed in lieu of another bill, they are sometimes called companion bills. Now, in the lawmaking process, one bill goes through many revisions. The bill as introduced provides evidence of the original language, and looking at different versions of the bills, you might be able to find evidence of specific inclusion or exclusion of some of the provisions. Some bills have only formatting changes as they go through their various versions, but others can have major revisions made at any time during the lawmaking process. Congress will print another version if there are any substantial changes. So this is the picture of where the bills are printed. Typically, they're printed as it's introduced, as it's reported out of committee, as it's engrossed, meaning past one of the chambers, as it's referred to the other chamber. It could be printed again as it's reported out of that committee if it is. And then finally, it's printed as an enrolled bill. That's the way it passed both versions. And this is an example of a bill. They're identified by Congress, chamber, and then number. Since each chamber starts with the number 1 when a new Congress begins, be sure to include the Congress number and the chamber, either HR or S, whenever you write down a bill number. Hearings are when Congress hears testimony from each other and from people interested on the subject of proposed or potential legislation. Hearings only prove Congress was aware of something, not necessarily the intent of Congress. And Congress will often hold hearings on a subject it is considering writing laws on to find out more information before anything is drafted. Hearings from past Congresses are often considered part of the legislative history of a law passed in a later Congress. Checking our chronology, hearings can happen before a bill is even introduced, maybe even in a prior Congress, or a committee can decide to hold a hearing on one or more bills that they're considering. This is an example of a hearing on a number of bills from the 110th Congress, all of them on the subject of national parks legislation. And while there is a very tiny hearing number on the cover of this hearing, hearings tend to be referred to by their titles, the names of the committees that hold them, and their dates. And here on this page, we can see the Undersecretary of Natural Resources and Environment is giving a prepared statement. Witnesses can also answer questions, and the senators and congressmen talk a lot too. In the legislative history, the term hearing refers to this transcript of what was said at those hearings, and these transcripts can sometimes take up to a year or more to be printed. Reports are often the most useful part of a legislative history. These are when the Congressional Committee recommends passage, often with reasons of why this bill should become a law. Reports can come from committees from either chamber, as well as from a conference committee that has members from both chambers, if there was a substantial difference in the two versions of the bill passed that needed to be ironed out. Reports are referred to by chamber, Congress, and report number. So the report seen here should be cited as HR Report 112-322. Committee prints are just documents that Congress is asked to have printed up for their convenience. They can be as simple as a markup version of a bill that shows the effect the legislation would have if enacted by having strike-throughs and underlines to show deletions and additions, Or sometimes a committee print can be a legislative history. Here's an example of a committee print that's just a copy of the Endangered Species Act as currently amended at the time of this printing in 2004 or 5. Activities on the floor of Congress are recorded in the Congressional Record. It's the complete record of what happens on the floor of Congress every day, including floor amendments and votes. Of course, as edited by the members to make themselves look better, but that's beside the point. It only includes those things that happen on the floor, so it does not include committee meetings or hearings. When a report is submitted to Congress, that fact is noted in the record. And the Congressional Record has two separate editions. So this is all the different. These are all the different discussions that happen on the floor of Congress. Anyway, the two editions of Congress are the daily edition, which has page numbers that are different from Senate or the House. So they either start with H for House page number or S for Senate page number. And there's also a permanent edition of the Congressional Record, which comes out many years later and has totally different pagination. This is page 2 of this Congressional Record. If the Congressional Page Record number does not begin with a letter, it's from the bound annual edition. And then the last piece of legislative history doesn't come from Congress at all. The President can issue a message called a signing statement as the last step of the legislative process. After a bill has passed both chambers in the identical form, it's presented to the President for either signing or a veto. Presidential signing messages are printed a number of places, but their official source, for those prior to 2009, is something called the Weekly Compilation of Presidential Documents. This is an example of President Clinton's signing statement on signing the Land Disposal Program Flexibility Act of 1996 in the Weekly Compilation of Presidential Documents for March 29, 1996. Beginning in 2009, the weekly compilation was replaced by the daily compilation of presidential documents. And these are the President's remarks on signing the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2014. And that's the documents in a legislative history.